Hello, everybody. I'm Ben, and welcome to the channel. This is an interview episode, one of the few that we have right now, and I'm really excited to jump into it. I wanted to preface it by showing Alexis's books. These are two of my favorite books in modern comics. And listening back over the interview, I was struck how smart Alexis is and how crazy I sound a lot of times. So I think this is a good conversation. It might not be the best interview. I'm not a very good interviewer, and I was very much into the conversation. So if there's any rambling or unconnected pieces in this interview, it's my fault. And you all know, if you've seen this channel, that I am working on Joe Death and the Graven Image, and I'm just now finishing it. These are some of the chapter breaks of the illustrations. And I have a weekly newsletter called Old Noggin, and you can sign up for it on my website, benjaminshipper.com, and wait. Everything I do is gonna be seen there first, and I really love writing that newsletter and going through some tutorials and just showcasing work that I'm doing and also that I love from other people. So I hope you enjoy this interview. If you do, make sure to stick through to the end or jump to the end, because Alexis walks us through some of his process and some images for his third book, the final book in this series, Geis from No Brow. So it's really awesome. That was such a treat. So please stay tuned to the end, or jump over us and see it. But thanks again for watching, and enjoy the interview.
It didn't warn me.
Yeah, no, it's all.
There's several loud beeps, though. I think that's
what
they're going with these days.
Yeah, we're on air now. Thanks so much for wanting to talk.
Oh my God, it's an absolute pleasure. Like, I love that. As I'm sure you are also aware, we have quite a specific interest set. And so the odds of just bumping into someone in daily life who cares about any of the stuff that we care about, very small.
Very low, yeah.
But getting to have a conversation with somebody else with these interests it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and it's quite incredible what we can, do, I think, with technology, obviously. And, this is an international kind of affair here. I mean, your books are coming from England, and I'm so excited to see them. And I've lived with this book for a long time. And, the specific interests, I do feel like, it was like this, I've had comics, and everyone pretty much has grown up with comics in their periphery, but there's a certain to me, there's an extreme amount of potential for comics, and I see a lot of ways in my context, American comics being very tied to American comics and cape and cowl superhero stuff, which isn't bad. It's just I gravitated towards Lord of the Rings and Narnia and Harry Potter and more.
Well, it's really interesting that comics, they have this wonderful potential for telling those kinds of stories especially. But it's interesting that certainly in here in the UK and in the States as well, we haven't managed to produce an epic fantasy or myth-based narrative that's really caught hold in the way that those books have. Would be interesting to discuss why we think that might be. I know that there is definitely this kind of conflation that people make between comics, the medium, and the superhero genre, and a few others, I guess, as well. Comics is one of those media that gets mixed up with genre, a bit like animation as well. You hear that word and you think of a certain type of story. And I don't know whether that's part of the reason why. I suspect also, having worked on one, and you might agree with me here. They're incredibly tough.
Yes.
There's a lot of hats you have to wear while making them. Yeah. And I wonder whether that just means that, you know, the pool of people making them is quite narrow. And so the odds are less that we get someone who's going to make a story that really resonates with a broad audience.
Absolutely. And it seems to be a lot like, well, okay, so you made one, so let's say those things are made. There does seem to be a lot of plowing across a pipeline, for instance. So like for sales and for getting the thing that we made to people that we think would like them. For instance, I think a lot of people who do like Lord of the Rings and Narnia and Harry Potter and prose books of fantasy would enjoy your books, and I think they would like my book as well. But that type of, you know, it's like for the publishing companies, it's like this, you know, severe turn into a cross industry, and the stagnation of industry almost seems like a bigger hurdle than just even, I mean, it is the hurdle after you make something that you have to now figure out a way to get it to the audience or for it to find the audience. And so, yeah, that just seems like another hurdle.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've had sort of direct experience of it. As you saw on Instagram a little while ago, that they've rebranded the book, resized it, changed the look and feel of the production, and changed the title in the hopes that it can jump from one audience group to another, because it looks more like, you know, something that this audience group is familiar with reading, and maybe it's going to find more of a home there. So it sort of jumped from European independent look and feel through to something that looks a little bit more like manga. Of course, the illustration inside is a different aesthetic, but, you know, that maybe they feel like some of the themes would resonate with the audience that's reading manga a little more.
Yeah. Was that very hard to, as the person that made it? And, you know, obviously it's set, you know, I think you're in all parts of these books, and they're just beautiful. I'm sure Nobrow as well was excited about the printing quality.
Oh, Nobrow did a great job with the production on those first two. Yeah, I've got my two here as well, and they feel really nice in hand. The cloth spine, the paper stock, even the kind of, I don't know what they're using for the hardcover, but it's a sort of lightweight card that's it's got a nice thickness to it, but, you know, it's not like somehow that I don't know. You would think usually when you buy like a piece of technology or something, heavy makes you feel like it's quality. But in this case, I don't know. It's like they have this science of exactly how heavy the book should feel. It's just right. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to trust them with the new production. I do feel like they know what they're doing, but I am very sad that we're not finishing that 3 off.
Yeah. Well, hopefully in the future, when the whole
maybe one day.
Yeah.
It wasn't as painful a compromise as you might think. I mean, it was actually there was a point where it looked like the third one was not going to come out, where it was going to get cut. Yeah. They had this kind of huge crash in sales during the pandemic. Nobody's going to bookstores, so they just cut, you know, half their list. Anything that wasn't performing well, making a good return, out. But then things opened up fairly quickly and sales started picking up again, so it was back on the table. But for as much as a year, I was convinced it wasn't going to come out, and I was trying to take it around to different publishing houses and try and find another home for it. So actually, if it's just a case of a different cover and a new title, I'll take that.
Yeah. Oof. That's. I can imagine that'd be stressful. I'm just getting my files in order to send over to Dark Horse Comics, and it's just, I mean, the possibility that you could spend so long on something and for it not to be available to people that want to buy it, you know, it's very heart-wrenching.
Yeah, it was such a crushing feeling, like you can imagine, can't you? It's literally a year plus of work, and no one's going to see it.
Yeah. So let's rewind a little bit, and so you're a teacher as well right now.
Yeah.
And teaching on the university level, or the
yeah, master's level and bachelor's. So at the master's level, specialist children's book illustration on a couple of courses, and bachelor just illustration.
Okay. And your professional working experiences began in children's books. Is that right?
All my professional work's been for younger children. Yeah, okay. Picture books for small kids, and then Geis is my only comic book.
Yeah,
I've done a little bit of illustration for chapter books for older readers, but everything has been book illustration of one kind or another.
Okay. And how did that gap, or not gap, but how did you bridge? How did you, and why did you go from just illustrating someone else's texts and manuscripts to doing your own? Graphic novel. You've done your own picture books, so
Yeah, I'd been an author before. I mean, obviously, it's a very different beast. I've actually got a couple of them here, so I can maybe if I pull one out without collapsing anything. Yeah, so this is with one that sold the best, and I haven't counted them, but there's not many words in here. It's like it's less than 100, I think, and then a lot of illustrations that have to convey lots of sort of more general information. It's a very different task from a comic. But I mean, the main reason that I wanted to change was because of the publishing culture for children's books here in the UK, which is very censorious, if that's a word. I don't know, maybe I just made that up. But they're very risk averse, yes. A very market-led, which really gets me down, because I feel like you should be following principles of which you believe are behind what a good story is, rather than the tail wagging the dog and the market telling you what's good. So I was finding that I was getting a lot of ideas rejected, and I felt like they weren't on story grounds. I felt like it was because they were being excessively risk averse. And also, I think I felt like I had ideas that were more adult, more closely connected with my own lived experience. A lot of children's books, you're having to refer back to your own childhood or communicate directly to children in your life. And it's there's a little bit of a psychological jump that has to take place. Children have a much narrower frame of reference, and you can't sort of rely on them to be able to deal with certain kinds of narrative themes. And also, I'd always been a huge comics fan, and as you say, fan of prose fantasy and these sorts of stories. And I was desperate to have a go at it myself. I was kind of mid-30s, and I thought, this is it. It's like, either I try now or it's not going to happen.
Okay. That's good to hear. I just turned, I'm 32 now, and I began sort of plowing into comics when I was still in my 20s, and I thought, I still think like, oh my goodness, I feel like I'm so late to starting here, but
there is time.
Yeah.
My favorite picture book artist is an American called William Steig. I don't know if you had his books when you were little. He's the author who wrote the book that Shrek is based on.
Yes.
But he was a cartoonist for the New Yorker for the majority of his career, and switched to picture books at age 65.
Oh.
And he had a 30-year career, 65 to 95. And I think he wrote some of the best picture books ever made. So I always think of that when I'm feeling like I'm running out of time as well.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think you're all right. I think I think you have plenty of time.
Yeah.
Although it is worrying to see your life disappear in these kind of 3-year chunks, right? When you take on projects of this size.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, like Geis, I think first volume was published in 2016, something like that. So that's 6 years between the first and the last. That's not really sustainable.
Right. is it that well, in books as well, I guess there's just always this balance of um, quality over quantity. I mean, it's you can actually kind of do both. I feel like if people can just flood with content, 2 or 3 books a year, if that's like writing or writing for other people, or I think there's some sort of thing that you do eventually get to quality if you can produce a ton of quantity. But for me, I don't know.
It's sort of John Ford versus Stanley Kubrick kind of thing.
Yeah, and there's all the measures in between.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I feel like I would love to learn by making a lot of work. I think that would be my preferred way of working, but I find myself in the other camp because I'm a bit slow.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is interesting because we're gonna dive into sort of your image making and your illustration real quick, if you don't mind the question.
No, sure.
I mean, I'm just looking at your work, and I'm like, you have figured out how to. Well, in my opinion, this could be wrong. You'll correct me if I am. You have learned how to be happy with like drawings that are drawings and they're not infinitely perfect on every level. Or, I mean, maybe there's a different barometer or things that you're checking that go into your kind of perfect category, which I would love to hear. But there's, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, that dates right back to my very beginnings as an illustrator. When my first publishing deal was for a book called Slow Loris, and I got it off I'd been sending them story after story because it was sort of the first time that I had a publishing contact, and were all getting rejected, and so I was getting less and less precious with what I was sending into them. And the last story that I sent in was this story, Slow Loris. And it was sort of very like rough charcoal drawings. And for some reason they liked the story. And they offered me a deal. And so I had a look back at this dummy that I'd made, and it was like so scrappy. Really embarrassingly scrappy. I said, there's no way that this can be my first, like my debut on the world of published illustration. So I went back to every picture and I redrew it in etching, like, dry point etching.
Yeah, wow.
Because that was the fanciest method that I knew at that time. It's like, this to me was craft,
More fancy, yeah.
More fancy, exactly. And I took these etched things in to show them. I was super proud of them. And they just hated them. They were like, make it more like the dummy that you sent us. And we had this really painful to and fro over a few months where I was just like gradually having to throw away all these beautiful etchings that I'd made and go back to these charcoal drawings that I did not respect. But they kind of ground me down. And in the end, I got to see their point of view. And as the years have gone by, I've really internalized that way of thinking. Essentially, there's a few things behind it. Like, one is that as soon as your picture does its job and tells the story that you want it to tell, or provokes a response that you want it to provoke, that's kind of done, and nothing else is particularly important. The second one is, I feel like if I finish my work excessively, I feel like it cuts the audience out of the equation. There's like a little bit of room when your drawings are slightly unresolved for your audience to put a bit of themselves into the work to try and complete what they're looking at. And I feel like that's something really valuable. And the third aspect of it is that, whilst I was very proud of these etchings that I made, if I'm honest, they were a real pain in the ass to make, and I didn't enjoy them. They felt like work. Whereas when I'd been making the charcoal pictures, I was loving making those drawings. I was really enjoying that process. And I think that is in many ways the most essential thing. And I think that's why maybe your work, for example, is much more finished and resolved, because I feel like that's where a lot of the joy is for you as an artist and a maker. But for me, when it gets to that sort of stage, it becomes a bit joyless.
Yeah.
Like, I really like the initial moment of creation and creativity and seeing the things arrive in front of my eyes. But anything beyond that point starts to get dull pretty quickly for me. So I try and stay as close as possible to the kind of drawing that I'm really enjoying doing. Like, I'm getting a kick out of it.
Yeah. Oh man, that's so cool. It is a real reshaping of like, well, it's very counterintuitive, might be the word, where, you know, you're making something, you want to impress people. You want to impress something on them. To us, I think beginning out, it does seem like, well, if I put the maximum amount of work and effort and attention towards this, it will result in something that's impressive. But it's so fascinating that what is impressive is not doing that. What is impressive is being able to let things grow and live and be on their own, just kind of an expression. I mean, an expression quickly out. I mean, it still has fun, you know, very good fundamentals, and it's on top of a lot of things like composition and great design and everything. But that's like, it's like when Princess Leia addresses Grand Moff Tarkin about, you know,
that's a perfect analogy.
Yeah,
with the more you tighten your grip, the more star systems will slip through your fingers. Yes,
yeah.
Exactly so.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with the word fundamentals, because I think as you progress as an artist, you know, we all go through a very similar journey, I feel like. And when we start out, we get, you know, you've probably read Scott McCloud, Understanding Comics, and he talks about this. You get kind of seduced by surface and slickness and quality and, you know, bright, shiny. And then as you learn a little bit more about storytelling and drawing, you start to value some of the, as you say, principles that are underpinning it, some of the composition, the design, the storytelling, the gesture, these kinds of things. And I think you start to value when people wear that knowledge lightly, when they have fun and they play within that, the knowledge that foundation is so strong. It's something that's much more established in French comics, I feel. You know, they have this really strong tradition of very loose art, if you want to put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but with very good fundamentals underneath.
Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Nope, that was it.
Well, I was gonna go point out the Christophe Blaine books behind.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his, especially these Isaac the Pirate comics.
Yeah, I have the hardest time getting some of his work, most of his work, and I have a few. I have the first Isaac the Pirate and a few dungeon books that he did, and the Speed Abater, and it's just like they're. I mean, I always have them near me, and I always enjoy looking at them. I mean, there's something about French comic storytelling that, like, I don't necessarily know if I connect with. It seems like a string of events that just happens, and you sort of follow the characters along. And I think that's probably cultural, but as far as that looseness, and
it was actually one of the things I was responding to with the way that I wrote Geis, because it was so frustrating that there was this. I just find this artwork beautiful, and that the minute-to-minute storytelling, like the moment that you're in on any given page, I'm right there. Yeah. But just the same as you, like, it feels frustratingly improvised. And stories kind of peter out, and characters that you love disappear and just kind of fade out of the narrative. And it's so frustrating as a reader.
Yes. There's something like, it's a little bit like, well, I mean, Game of Thrones, I read some of the books and watched all the show, and it's like, you know, it's just sort of like candy of like stuff coming at you, and, you know, you're on this sort of adrenaline kick of stuff happening, but I don't ever think about those stories when I'm not talking about them, or as a bad example. It's just like there's less interactivity between in a spiritual sense. I think the best stories are usually well, they have a cosmology that things matter. I think they have an understanding that, for instance, the Lord of the Rings. Um, there's this overarching cosmology of how the whole entire world began, and so it splits into a classic good versus evil narrative, but from the highest perspective to the very lowest, inside each character's heart. And I think same with Star Wars. There's this presentation of choice. There's this presentation of good and evil, and choices matter. And so there's always that war inside single characters and outside of the characters interacting, and every choice.
I find this like so essential to what the stories are that I value the most. I remember hearing a critique of Lord of the Rings saying that, the fact that Boromir and his Theoden, is it the king, are the ones who die because they, made a mistake or took a wrong choice. They said that was a fault with the storytelling. It's too neat. And I feel like Game of Thrones falls a little bit into that trap as well, where it's it tries to be clever with what stories are by saying, oh, here's this, here is our glowing golden hero, Robb Stark or whatever. And we're going to subvert your expectations by killing him at a point you don't expect, when he still had, when he was midway through a narrative arc, which is it is a very exhilarating thing to watch happen, and it feels very real. But it takes away a certain aspect of story, which I think is, for me, even more important. And that's to do with how story relates to what it is to be alive, and the idea of story as kind of, as myth, as something that connects us to the eternal, to the world outside of ourselves. And I think what you said there, relating to Lord of the Rings, that, everything mattered, from the tiniest thought inside the smallest character's head to the largest battle and the largest, outside the largest castle in the world. Everything was relevant. I think that's kind of essential to the stories that I love the most.
I can tell.
So I'd never see that as a fault.
Yeah. Yes, it's a very different. I mean, I do think, puzzling out. I do think that is sort of the underpinnings of why things feel random, and maybe have some benefit of randomness, and but it's very material. I would say it's materialistic. It's just kind of, we're just material bumping into material, and in spiritual context, it's like stories have a purpose. I mean, in that framework where I'm not just telling a story for entertainment. I'm interested, and I think probably Tolkien, certainly Lewis, and Rowling, and so many. The traditional perspective of story is imparting to generations to come a particular truth that will help them navigate their life. So, Boromir and Denethor, it's not a representation of real life. That's the point. But it's a representation of a real kind of spiritual ethic, which is, if you try to dominate people, if you try to take something selfishly, this results in a type of spiritual death. I mean, I think we all understand this now on a personal level, where, the more star systems we grab, the more types of things we hoard, which are sort of like dragons as well, which operate very well in Tolkien stories. The more we hoard and pull towards us, the smaller we are, the more selfish we are, the more angry and destructive we are towards other people, and we see things in material more than people, and those spiritual relationships, which is just this non-material aspect of us communicating through language and our past experiences interacting together in space. It's like this crazy thing that can happen in a book, and it happens with people reading that book. And your books, Geis, are all, they're all very much taken up with this, I think. And I hope none of that sounds boring, because the real beauty is that can be in stories that are completely fun from top to bottom in a fantasy context. Where
it doesn't sound boring at all. It's kind of, these are the things that I dedicated my life to trying to communicate. I don't find them boring at all.
Yeah.
But I think that's why we use the medium of storytelling to communicate these messages, because if you just say them, they don't, it's hard to convey the truth that they contain.
Yes. And we don't necessarily, and even just saying something quickly because we've heard someone else say it, I think that's kind of the gem that writers get to, which is, I thought I had this basic principle that I was going to spout out, through one of the characters or whatever. But if you place it in a story, everything kind of matters. So you can't just create. You can, but it would be boring. It would be very preachy. And inside the story, I've learned a significant amount of I don't know, understanding of how things could work. Like, for instance, everything is connected. So that person who is kind of pointing out this flaw with Dennis Thor and Boromir, it's like, death is the end result of servant leaders like Gandalf. He died the first book, and then there's this translation of Frodo and Gandalf later out of Middle Earth into I say heaven essentially, but it is a removal. It's still a painful process for Frodo, where he does die essentially to this world and to the enjoyment he had in his garden and with food and stuff. There's still pain and death, even doing the right thing.
That was always one of the parts of Lord of the Rings that I found to be like, there's that moment towards the end of the book where you almost feel the clock ticking in Bag End, like he can't be present anymore. He doesn't really exist in this world anymore. It's just, and it feels there's a lot of emotional truth, I think, to what happens to Frodo in that story. And I think it makes his sacrifice mean more as well. He really did give something up. Gandalf too, when Gandalf comes back, who's Gandalf the White, and I think this is something they do quite well in the movies. He's not really the same man. He's, as you say, this kind of, it becomes a little bit archetypal. And he doesn't have those little ticks of speech, or doesn't quite have the twinkle in his eye that he did as Gandalf the Grey. He's in a way died. I love all that stuff. It really speaks to me.
Yeah. There's such a pressure. You pressure cook kind of characters. You put them in a situation that calls for them to answer or deny something, and they go forward when they do answer, because that's really what stories are. Even in Jonah from the Bible, it's like, he denied a call and he went somewhere else, but it came around. So it's always a progression of a character. We don't really necessarily tell a whole lot of stories of people that deny every hard thing that comes, and they exist on their couch or in their kind of comfortable lives for their entire life, and then they die. Those aren't really stories.
It's a new genre waiting to people.
Yeah. Huge tomes of these people's
I feel like I haven't read much James Joyce, but I feel like from what I hear, that's something that he attempted to do. But as to whether that was a worthy ambition or not, I don't know. This is the danger of postmodernism, isn't it? And when you start to try and break convention for the sake of breaking it.
Yeah, you kind of get the reward for doing it first, I think. But then
credit to James Joyce for sure.
Yeah.
But we're a long ways away. We're a long ways off that now. I actually, I don't know if you would agree with this, but maybe for different reasons. I feel like we are being denied these. This is one of the reasons why I love comics so much, because I feel like there's some hope in comics. But I feel like we're being denied the stories that this point in our culture and our time, this moment in our history requires. I loved Star Wars when I was a kid, but it's a story of its time. It's a myth of its time. And the constant rehashing of things, the constant rebranding and the market-led storytelling is really making a problem, I think, for our understanding of who we are.
Yes. Yeah. I do find that I do find a little bit of hope there in comics to get a story like that across, which is like largely for my lights, I guess, or if that's a way of saying it. Like, it is this grip of the consortium or the giant conglomerate over the individual on every level. So the individuals that are accessing entertainment and stories are accessing it from these very convenient points of access from screens through streaming. And all they can do is interact with that, really. Like, the air, I feel like, is so sucked out of the room for print books, where I do know people, and there's still love for it, but in relation to video games. So we can talk about movies and shows and stuff, and I think those are obviously popular, but video games are ginormous on a level like above that, I believe.
Certainly in terms of the number of people that go into making them.
Yeah, making and playing, and it's not that I think those things are bad, but the addiction to those things is bad. Like, it's this odd.
Yeah, it's funny because I suffered, I think, from computer game addiction in my 20s, because I felt like, that was a realm where I feel like I had access to the kind of life that I wanted / expected. It was more connected to these sort of themes that we were talking about, because often you're living your way through a myth, or you're being the hero of your own story in a way that is maybe difficult to access in daily life otherwise. But it is a bit of a trap, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's nice that they're engaging with that kind of narrative. And I do feel like these themes keep popping out, in spite of us. And there are some wonderful games out there. But yeah, they can become a trap for sure.
Yeah, I guess I spun out quickly there, but talking about like sort of the like kind of stranglehold on like past popular narratives, like Disney with Star Wars, Amazon with Lord of the Rings. Like,
I'm so afraid for that one.
Yeah, it's I think there's a lot to be said, and I think skirting all of that could potentially most helpful for like us and audience wise, like in thinking of just the amount of attention that they require for us to consume and talk about. It takes a significant amount of time and effort and attention away from what we could be making, what we could be writing, what we could be sharing together over dinner, over having writing groups and book clubs like these. I think books and writing and comics, they come out of I think discussion and community and relationships, and if we're all just engaging with like screens from companies that have done like market research to hear what everyone in a globalist kind of society is wanting, you just get this kind of stew, or is this microwave? I mean, it's just microwaving. Like, it's so to me sad. I don't need to point out all the things that I think are wrong or misdirecting in like the new iterations of the franchises. I only need to talk about what that is to create something out of your desire, like Lucas or Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, Rowling, from an individual perspective, and then years later when you're gone, or you that transfer of money. So someone came in with giant thing of money, paid, take it away. It's very internal to Lord of the Rings, where for the rings, like the ring wraiths come to the dwarves, I think it is, and they try to buy their rings, or there's always that aspect when the ring wraiths are coming to a place and they say, where's Baggins? Well, if you tell us where he is, we'll give you gold. And so money is it's just such an interesting problem right now, just because of that. Yeah, I don't know.
It's funny, isn't it? I think it has a lot to do with that these kind of like money, for example, or the way that a computer system works. They have a very strong gravity, and it's very easy for aspects of being human to get sort of pulled in by the gravity of these ideas or these systems. And I think at the moment we're really strongly tugged by these two forces. So Geis was written as kind of a response to binary, like the idea that the world is binary, that there's a yes and a no, a naught and a one. That's where Io's name comes from. It's like 1, 0.
Yeah.
And the whole book is about this idea that's not really a thing. That the two. I had it very well put by a student of mine the other day. A wave is a concept that's much closer to the way that the world actually functions, rather than an on or off. And Geis is supposed to be about like reconnecting the naught and the one.
Yes.
So yeah, and I feel like that we've seen so many things happen in politics and whatever. Here in the UK, we've had very divisive political issues, and you stand on this side or you stand on that side. It's a very unhelpful way of being. And then the money question as well. And I think this really frustrates me with the publishing industry. I'm sure it's even worse with film and TV. You're telling the kinds of stories which have messages which are deeply tied to the experience of being human. But without admitting it, underneath all of them, your main objective is to sell multiples, or to get the widest possible consumption of your product. And oftentimes that conflicts directly with the needs of telling a good story.
Yes, yeah. I think we kind of default to our lower sensibilities in a lot of ways. So I think probably the majority or the mass will choose the thing that will not disturb our preconceptions or our
Well, that's it. I mean, you put it well yourself a few minutes ago when you're talking about the person on the sofa, who gets up maybe to go die. That's a broad consumer base right there.
Yeah.
And they don't really, challenging that is not profitable.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm above these forces either, by the way.
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
I buy a lot of stuff.
Yes,
I don't want to seem like I'm preaching to anybody. We're all in the same, the same mixer, the same blender.
Yeah, and everything. I mean, every purchase we make, we give to some company that is run. It is employing tons of people. So it's not I think it is humanitarian to buy, goods and services whenever we're
both producing product as well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So there does have to be a compromise. I think it just is like where that question is on the chain. And I feel like it's either at the top or too near the top for our own good, really.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we kind of have to do what we can on our level. And I think, I mean, I guess we are interested in sort of the. It seems like we're interested in the big questions of our society and of our generation, and but we're also intensely interested in not classifying it as such. I mean, getting very local in the things that we like as just individual people. I, Gesh, like, it looks like nothing I have ever seen in a modern publishing context. I'm getting into sort of medievalism as a aesthetic, or just trying to go back to, I guess, that culture. For some reason, I'm just drawn to medieval sculpture and stuff. And are you a medievalist? Do you look at all this stuff? Where's
I mean, I used to worry about myself because I didn't have anybody who I liked or admired who was still kind of alive.
Yeah.
Everything that I felt I was resonating with was either from 100 years ago, or sometimes more. Well, I wouldn't say I was a medievalist per se, but those are some of my strongest influences and the things that I keep coming back to for sure. Maybe it's to do with, I don't know, that it's the way that work produced in that era is still, it's almost like outsider art in the sense that I don't feel that they have this consciousness that we were talking about. They haven't broken the machine to find out how it works. They're just producing.
Yeah. Look, right. Like, they haven't, I was thinking of the machine as well, where they haven't constructed the machine to mitigate all asymmetry. I mean, they're working in stone, and they're working with paint. They're working with natural materials, and they are organic, people. And so just the ability to set up a tapestry, this is this giant physical object, and there obviously is a plan there, but you can't indefinitely redo that tapestry, infinitely, until you make it exactly perfect. Same with sculpture and painting. You're limited by, like, time and materials, and that results in this very organic feeling artifact.
It's like sometimes the wrongness is as interesting as the rightness, isn't it? It's kind of, the defects they really grab your attention.
Yeah.
I definitely value that. I mean, I'd like to think that it isn't just making excuses for bad craftsmanship, which I feel like sometimes it is. As I've gone on with the Gesh books, I've gotten more skilled, like, in terms of these, because I'm sure you will be making Joe Death, like, making comics is hard, and as you're going on, you learn as you do. But I there's always this little bit of fear that the more familiar you get with the task, like, you start to get distant from that naivety, which is still kind of plugged into the root of something essential. A little bit like I was talking with that book, Slow Loris. So, it'd be interesting to see what you make of the third book, because, in relation to the previous two, it looks quite different. It's a little bit more slick, but I hope it still retains that quality that you've enjoyed in the first two.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about in a visual context, because that does kind of happen in the progression of any written work too, where you start somewhere, and even the author, I think, doesn't know, exactly. They can't know, because we exist in time just like the characters do, and the more time you spend with the characters writing them, the more the character grows, and so it's going towards a climax, for lack of a better term. You're going towards, you're progressing towards a conclusion, and things get hyper focused in that conclusion. Things come down to a point, and it's interesting to think about that. I think it's probably easy to spot that in visuals of art, or a progressive visual narrative, but also in writing things. It makes sense that things have to go towards a place of decision, or the commitments that characters made here bring them along towards a conclusion.
Yeah, that's hard to do as well, isn't it? Because there's that lovely moment when you're reading a story, even some of these that we've mentioned that we love, where you have that feeling of infinite possibility, and that moment when you close that last page, or turn off the film or whatever, and all possibilities kind of ended. It can be very anticlimactic, very reductive. And especially with something like Geis, where I've been working it for literally years. I was reading through it. I'm reading through the PDF a couple of days ago, and I was enjoying it. I felt like, oh yeah, it's telling the story. And then as I started to get towards the end, I realized it was going to stop. And I thought, oh God, I hope I haven't kind of done that thing of just, tying everything up too neatly, or just stepping away too suddenly. Endings are so difficult.
Yeah.
Ideas really do shrink down when you actually just name a thing.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, and I think it does require the interactivity of the audience almost. I think there's an interesting thing in which there's more happening inside a reader's mind than you've ever put on a page, and that type of character. I mean, I think Io is one of the characters I think about when there's a choice to be made, and there's two choices to be made with let's say saving Nemus, saving someone that tried to kill her. She saves him at the last of the first book, and she becomes immortal at that moment because she did something quite special, which is she didn't choose to leave him outside, or it's quite substantial what those choices do for readers, and even so I've wondered that too, about just finishing my book, when it's I'm reading it and I'm liking a lot of the moments. There's a lot of pieces that I really love along the way, and at the end I'm like, does it add to anything? Do we get anything from this? Is there and for Joe Death, I don't know if I'm a very good salesman here saying this stuff.
Well, I've been reading it. I'm about 10 15 pages in. I'm really enjoying it so far. So
yeah.
I'm looking forward to that kind of disappointed feeling. No, I'm sure I'll like it right up until the end. But does it continue, or is this a self-contained thing?
So I would very much like it to continue. I mean, I think the choice of the character does end in a conclusion. There's a lot of things that are concluded, or at least seen through to an end. But I have set it up very much to be a bigger story, and part of that is actually I had to make a cosmology kind of, because I dipped into a lot of internal mythology, where it's important that the characters in the story have a mythology of not just a mythology, but beliefs and where they actually came from, which could be different things to the characters. So they had to be talking in a way that makes sense in the whole picture of their world. So I needed to know all of that. So I had to kind of write essentially like a Silmarillion, very condensed, and it's just.
You have your version. You have a Bible,
yes,
a show Bible.
Yeah, like a little Bible. Yeah, it's not very long, but the the concept, I guess, is kind of like a sandbox. Like it's a sandbox that I think the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit came out of the Silmarillion. So Tolkien did his sandbox, which is, you know, just a toddler's way of seeing a cosmology, which is a beginning, and how things progress from that beginning. And so, yeah, that's what I'm hoping. Like, you know, there's a lot of, with every character I've introduced in the book, I want readers to be interested in them, and to see that this could be a, you know, there's a couple different worlds in Jodeth inside. There's like the human world, there's like an insect world, and there's kind of a beast kind of world, an anthropomorphic animal kind of world. And I mean, it's to see the potential there, which, you know, but the bug world could be turned into a small children's book line. Like it's weird kind of commercialism, because at one point I'm extremely wanting to make something that is authentic and artistic. And I'll let my dog out.
Yeah, sure.
Speaking of the beast world. But I think I realized that, like, there is more profit financially to be made by doing that, almost, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's what I'm always trying to tell to my publishers as well. It's like, it's not like I'm telling you to you know, not reach an audience, but look at something like a Star Wars, look at something like a Lord of the Rings. We're talking about them now. You know, people have made that franchise was sold for billions. Star Wars, literally. Like, that's because this stuff really resonates with people and really matters to people. So yeah, I think I 100%. And I hope, you know, that you are able to convince them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's such a gamble, because it's literally like gambling. You could end up with absolutely nothing, or you could, you know, hit the jackpot. You could maybe get in between there somewhere, but a success to me would just be it being able to keep going, making art, and obviously, you know, providing for our needs. But frugality seems to be like quite a good staff to walk with if you are making comics or doing art. Do you consider yourself frugal, or like, do you try to be?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to be, right? Mm-hmm. So my advance for Geis 3 was £6,000, so around sort of $7,000. That's for like, what, a year and a half's work?
Yeah,
maybe more, 2 years' work.
Yeah.
If you work that out on a per diem, it's pretty ugly.
Yeah.
So some sacrifices have to be made. But I don't, you know, hopefully not at the expense of people that I care about. Mm-hmm. Right. I think we're more talking about the kind of sacrifice of like carving out a few teaching days, or, you know, making something that's a little bit more commercially oriented. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you have to, I think when you say frugal, I mean, it's about what you value, right? Mm-hmm. It's about valuing the things that are important and making space in your life for these things to be able to be a part of your life. And I think in that sense, like, frugality with that definition is kind of like essential. I'm a huge fan of Joseph Campbell. Do you ever watch him talk?
So I have watched him. I have watched kind of the series that I think it was on Netflix at one point, but I don't think I made it through the whole series. And I mean, I know what Lucas did with his work, and I have my thoughts about him, or about his. I have like one thing that I'm sort of caught up on, but please continue with.
No, I just you know, he there's certain things that he says over and over, and the idea of kind of following bliss or being led by your bliss, I think it's a nice way of living, because I feel like that connects you to what's true for you. And making comics that's it for me, you know. I get that from making comics. You have some issues with him, do you? I mean, I'm not an expert on his oeuvre at all, so
yeah.
If there's anything I should know.
Well, I'm not an expert at all, including I haven't read or watched everything, so I'll probably defer to when we're not recording before I try to spin out something that I find as odd or something I disagree with. But I mean, I'm gonna take a rare moment to not say something.
You plead the fifth.
Disagree with, yeah. Which I don't usually do. I usually just like try to, I don't know, just speak candidly about everything. But I'm valuing a lot more patient kind of discussion and trying to tread, not tread heavily where I don't need to be. But yeah. Yeah, I really only spend money on books, like print books, and it's almost like it reduces down to food and electricity if you have those things. If you got a budget for that, what else do you need to kind of, I think a lot of people need time. They really do need time, but they don't realize that they want time or like time is this like thing. That is just getting sucked out of us, I think, by just the availability of entertainment and all these things tying us into technology. But it's yeah. So comics are you like them enough to keep doing them? Are you? I was interested.
I mean, I love making comics. Yeah. So there's two things that would prevent me, and one is the financial side of it because they pay very little. The other is the physical burden because I've struggled throughout my life with various joint problems. But then I think there's not many comics authors or animators or anybody who works intensively with these micro movements who doesn't have some sort of issue. So, I find the physical burden of making a comic to be pretty overwhelming, especially towards the end of making this third one. Towards the end of making any of them, actually, I've started to find that either my drawing hand would be breaking down a little bit or I'd be getting vision problems. It's so intensive and unremitting. I'm getting older and I can't imagine that sort of thing is going to get easier. So that might be something that prevents me. But those two things notwithstanding, I'm definitely intending to make more.
Cool. That's very good to hear. Have you, I don't want to get too overly prescriptive, but I felt that, I'm starting to run a lot more just about every day early. Has really, with actually a group of guys, like I don't think I could do it. I actually don't think I wouldn't be running this much if I wasn't running with other people. It's been super helpful to, just bring into work. And do you exercise at all, or like have you ever tried to?
Yeah, I mean, I used to teach Lindy Hop dance, swing dancing. Okay. So I used to do a lot of dancing. Of course, the pandemic's paid to that, but I think that is starting to come back. Yeah. I'm not very good with impact exercises, so running isn't great for me, but I do Pilates.
Sure.
Pilates and dancing have been my exercise forms.
Yeah.
Even so, you've got like kind of essential. Like I go to jelly if I don't do these things.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. It's cool. And you are, so I was interested how intense are you at the drawing table? Like, is it, are you spending as much time as you possibly can there and you're really trying to lock out all distractions and, is it that sort of thing, or do you kind of work in chunks or?
Yeah. The system that I found that worked best for me was a quota system. So for comics, especially, so I would have a target each day. And when that target was hit, I could stop. Mm-hmm. So sometimes that would mean longer or shorter hours. And that seemed to work rather than working to like a clock on, clock off kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah.
That, like, I'm sure you find this as well. Being self-employed, like, it's really hard to. People would think that you do too little, but actually, that's usually the opposite. You kind of do too much, and it's hard to know when to stop. So that helped me be able to kind of say, okay, this is the end of the day.
Pacing.
So that's been the system that I've used. And it doesn't work out as a huge workload. I think maybe drawing for sort of 6 hours a day, not more than 6 hours a day. That's enough.
Yeah. Is it as easy as like trying to do a page a day or half a page? Do you have a...
Yeah, exactly. That kind of thing. Yeah. So page a day, line work, more if it's... So I usually split up the line work and the coloring. Line work's all done and then we go back and color it in, which is kind of a dumb system, which I should change in the future.
Oh, you think so?
There's a lot of doubling up on, this is not very efficient.
Huh. So you would kind of think that drawing it and coloring it at the same time would be...
I think there should be like more of an active... I don't like that color is so passive in the process. Color is like a kind of tertiary stage. So I always feel like your decision should be made intuitively as you're trying to describe that moment in the story. The color kind of has a storytelling role to play as well. So if it's coming on right at the end, you're kind of denying it that storytelling role, or at least not giving it the power that you could. So, but the trouble is, my brain doesn't really work that way. I think in lines, and so I really struggle to be able to enjoy telling the story if I'm thinking in shapes. I feel like you're someone who does a better job of thinking in shapes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if I actually think in any kind of visual. Actually, I seem to have to struggle to get. I find all the visuals kind of as I'm doing them. I don't really actually think in images. I think more conceptually in dialogue. So I usually I actually feel more affinity with a writer than an artist, and I try to figure out something that is, visually pleasing, expansive. And so, it's quite it's all juggling. I mean, there's so much involved with comics at every level, like, multiple panels on a page, multiple characters saying things, acting, like verbal expression, non-verbal expression, and then to put color on that. If we can get an out by just doing color for the last, I think everyone will take it, and they would probably be right to speed things up. And that's something I've just finished coloring. I did a lot of different things. Like, so this book that I just finished, I experimented on basically like 4 years for a while, like just kind of redrawing and then coloring one page at a time after I finished it and getting bogged down with that. And so I guess what a lot of people are probably seeing with my images is a form of expedience that I've sort of hammered myself into or out of me. And that has resulted in something that I'm proud of. But I do think for my next book, I will try to loosen, or at least I've gained the ability to come at something looser and result in an okay thing. Whereas previously, to 5 years, I would come at it loose and it would be not pleasing at all.
Yeah, I mean that's the caveat to what we were saying earlier, isn't it? Like, it's great, the idea of working with freedom and everything, but if when you're just starting out with it or finding your voice there, it can look real bad.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need a bit of discipline and constraint, or it's not something you want to show or share with anyone.
Things in tension. So speaking of that kind of thing and things in tension, I identify a lot of like atmospheric perspective in your work and illustration in your panels. There's a quite a great effect that you have with foreground elements being very, thicker line, darker. I mean, you'll tighten lines where they need to be tightened, and you'll keep them extremely fuzzy and loose when you want to, I'm guessing, imitate that type of focal lens effect that we have with our eyes. If we're looking at the mountains, we can't, everything around us in our room or in the window frame is fuzzy. But if we look at the window frame, everything outside is fuzzy. And I think you've achieved that really well without much mechanical intervention. So not much layer effects in Photoshop, like just traditional ways of putting ink on paper, but with that intention. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's very nice to hear you say it back to me, because that's the intention for sure. I mean, I guess that's one of the reasons why I like physical media. I feel like some of the constraints are extremely helpful. There's this kind of never end, like when you've experienced this, I'm sure. I'm using the computer a lot as well, so I experience it a lot. But when you say something is done, there's very little risk when you're making a digital artwork. You can go back and history or a previous version or whatever. When I was doing Geis 1 and Geis 2, they are, I kind of had like one chance to get it right, and it's ink and brush, and so it was a great relief when I could leave something a bit vague in the background and not have to worry too much about it. But I also really like just aesthetically playing with depth of field. I always enjoy that look, and I feel like it makes a lot of story sense as well, that we kind of like guide our audience's attention and say, it's quite a gentle way of saying this is important, this is less important, this isn't important at all. You can just know that it's there.
Yeah.
There are mountains, we are outside, that's all you need to know. Move on.
Yeah, I'm trying to get a certain word to catch on in the larger comics space. So like Hergé, who did Tintin, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but the ligne claire, the clear line.
Oh yeah.
That
yeah, I'm sort of the antithesis of this movement.
Yeah, well, it's like Hergé did that, and many people found that form to be very helpful. So they just did that, and it became this kind of way in which comic artists can gain a lot of speed, So I think my word is graphospheric. It always comes
graphospheric.
Graphospheric, yeah.
I love that.
Graphic and atmospheric. It's
okay. I'll do my bit to try and I tell you what, because I'm teaching, I can plant that seed early.
Yeah.
I'll use it in critiques.
Please do.
I'm writing it down.
Yeah. And intentionally, I mean, very specifically in comics, I'm feeling that there's lots of potential there, and you're one of the people that would, I would say, do it very well, which is, it helps very much to be graphic, because it's symbolic, it's glyphic. So actually, this I came up with this idea, or whatever, I pieced together this idea before knowing about D.B. Dowd, who teaches at the Sam Fox School of Art in St. Louis. But he wrote a book, I think it's called Stick Figures, Drawing as a Human Practice. But in that book, he writes about the glyphic and the vedutic. And a vedutic would be a painting, so a very lush, atmospheric, detailed painting. And the glyphic would be, very iconic and symbolic and very tied to language base. So... but that that balance between those two things and coming together in a graphospheric perspective.
No, don't laugh when you say it. You got it'll never catch on like that.
I'll tell you, I'll be really goofy about it, and you learn how to say it right.
I will say it with all seriousness.
Yes, and then
this is a graphospheric piece.
Yes, thank
you.
You
know,
so good, and you're English, so it's
yeah, it's got that extra kudos, right? Without that. And I sound like I went to college because of prejudices and cultural stereotypes.
Right, correct. But in a comic where there's many different panels and people are trying to read it, many times I've had a problem looking at comics that I'll just pick up and it's like someone just smashing me in the face with all of this like text and image, and I can barely know where to start, and like I'm always pulled in different places, and like it seems in a lot of ways very hard. But so there's this great advantage if you can be graphic by leading, being very clear about main character, word balloons, giving enough space, enough margin in with the words, all these little details that can make things very clear. And like, but if you're too much that way, you sort of fall into, like, in my opinion, boring territory. Very, very boring comic thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely I guess a hobby horse of mine. But it's, as you say, like, there's a reason why people use clear line. I mean, one of the most compelling ones in comics is because you're writing the text all the time. And the text needs to be legible. And if that disconnect is too great between the image and the text, if you're not glyphic at all, if we want to borrow that word, it can be really jarring. Like, it can break immersion. And so, as you say, yeah, when you start to harmonize the two, bring them a little bit closer, it makes the reading experience a lot more intuitive. You feel like you're reading something where the two are of one harmonious piece. But if you're not careful, you can, like, cut off a huge chunk of your capacity to communicate through drawing in trying to compromise and be next to words in the way that you communicate. And as you say, if you think of paintings, you're in a different universe of communication. So I've always tried with well, I say always, I've only made one comic, but in the one that I am making, or have made, that's been a constant battle. And I've tried to get closer to that kind of sweet spot where you feel like you are accessing the speech bubbles in a way that isn't jarring. But also the imagery can have a little bit more emotional nuance, as you say, a little bit of graphospheric quality. That doesn't wrench you into a different universe. And I think, that's going to be like a lifelong journey, trying to strike that balance.
Yeah, that's very cool.
In the main, people have been really supportive of the first Geis books, although the readership has been very small. But one criticism that I did have was that the font, because it's a font based on handwriting, is a little bit jarring in combination with the images. And I think it is a little bit like I didn't quite succeed. It's the gap between image and text is just a little bit too great. So I'm hoping with the third one we changed the font for the rebranding. That is one thing that I'm quite pleased, actually. I feel like the new one is a little bit of a better partner for the imagery. But then I've also tried to bring the two just a little bit closer in the third one, so they feel more like a harmonious pair.
That's that. If I had something to poke at, that would probably be it.
There's lots of things wrong with them.
Yeah.
I was learning, but
it's certainly. That might actually be a reason why I have kept my lines so tight and linear, because they pair well with the handwritten font that I made as well.
That just isn't that isn't a criticism you could level at Joe Death. The text and image are working perfectly together in terms of their graphic quality.
Thanks.
Like they look of a piece. There's no jarring at all.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome. You've been very nice to me.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a shame that. So I'm, as I say, I'm only in like the second chapter. It would be great to. I need to start my own YouTube channel, and we can get you on.
Yes, you absolutely do. I mean, well, have you been watching Cartoonist Kayfabe?
No, should I?
Oh yes, yeah. So it's so I'm always like, to me, it's like the biggest thing happening in American comics right now, where two very competent, very good cartoonists who write and draw their own stuff, Ed Piskor and Jim Rugg. So they live in Pittsburgh, I believe, and they are making their own books, and they are, extremely big comic fans, and so they've collected over their lifetime a lot of books, and they just open the books up similar to what I do with I mean, I'm just a copycat channel, essentially, or very much so. I mean, there's just no better way to do it. I think that they're just crushing it on their making work, and they're selling their work through sharing what they have. So they'll have a bumper of like an advertisement of like, these are our books coming up, purchase these here. And but the content that they're sharing openly has been like monumental to just, I didn't grow up with a history of comic books. I only read Star Wars stuff, so books and comics. And so to realize that there's this significant body of work in comics, and I don't have to buy them all. I can just watch these, and I have bought. I mean, they're so convincing because the work is convincing. They showcase some of the best stuff in certainly American comics that I'm just blown away every time every time they show a new artist or so it is great, and they are a great example, I think, for getting around the problem of like selling your work but without telling exactly all about the story, like, or sharing all the story, which I always have found hard, where it's like I wrote a story to be enjoyed as a book for you to process, and so if I'm just getting on stage or on a video and I'm telling you all about the book, I'm robbing you from the experience of that, and so the gift is a little less. But there's
I mean, not just that. Also, like I always feel like author and work should be somewhat separated.
Yeah.
For the audience to be able to take ownership of it in their own way.
Mm.
So yeah, when you're up there saying, this is it, this is the book I made, it's sort of, it's funny. It's again, like you get this a lot teaching when you're reading books that people have made, and they kind of are doing a director's commentary as you flick through. It's like, oh, that's not meant to be there. This is the exciting bit.
Right. And it's like, that's why you made something. That is your communication to other people.
That's the thing. You can leave the room now.
It's only kind of harming it, because if you like me a lot, you just sort of want to be around me, but you don't really want the book. But if you don't like me, you're like, well, I'm going to pass on that book.
Yeah, it's sort of like a lose-lose, right?
It really is. So, but it is that modern problem in which I feel like the whole publishing industry and creators and everyone is getting stretched, and everyone has fallen in the cracks as far as how to get what we have made to people that would be interested in it. So it's kind of like the Wild West, and like to not do it, it would mean, having a secondary job, teaching or doing anything else, and that's where you make your money. But the people that do are like, this is the only option. It's kind of like in my opinion, I mean, I've tried to do everything else but get on the camera and talk, but it just seems to work significantly well by sharing, what you love. And I don't know if this is a Dorothy Sayers quote, but it's a good quote, so I'm going to attribute it to her. And it was like teaching is sharing what you love in public. Is that a?
I would definitely subscribe to that
definition.
Is that really
true? Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think comics. There's such a wonderful community around comics. Again, it taps in sometimes a little bit to what we began our discussion with, talking about comics as a genre. You know, sometimes that can be a little bit of a problem. But I feel like every now and again I'll find someone who is a gateway to a lot of other artists that I never would have discovered otherwise. So I'll definitely have a look at the channel you recommend.
Cool.
And yeah, I should consider doing it myself because, as you say, like, this is the way to speak to people, or it should be an aspect of it.
Yeah, and it's my channel isn't above 2,000 at the point right now, and like, it's hard to say if what it will result from this, but I personally just, the only reason I'm able to do this now is because I was listening to several people at the start years ago when I was trying to do comics. It's like the way people are accessing information now. So to not also not participate in that is well, I mean, it's a personal choice, but I'm very happy to because other people chose to participate in it, and that's why I'm able to do what I'm doing.
It would also be something of a perverse choice, given that we're both publishing stories. Like, it's sort of a strange kind of double think to say, yeah, I'm all for this kind of communication, but I completely refuse to engage in this kind of communication. Yeah, so long as you understand they are different beasts, I do think that you shouldn't be sniffy about something that you can enable you to communicate with other human beings.
Right. And I mean, tell me if you need to go, because I feel like we could talk about it.
Yeah, in a bit. I mean, I'm on the clock for animation company today, so.
Oh, fantastic.
But I will be catching up this evening if they're listening.
Interesting. Are you doing concept for?
Yeah, doing backgrounds for them. Yeah.
Okay. The final background, or are you layout?
No, background concept.
Okay. Wow, that's exciting.
I know, my first ever concept design gig. Okay. I'm super hype about it. It's so much fun.
I'm really interested to see how you'll do it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know whether it's going to look anything like by the end, but the show is very funny. So
cool. I did actually this past year I did have like a week stint doing some concept for something, and I couldn't take it. Like, the money was so good, but I just couldn't jam into the team that they had assembled, and it's all team participation in especially this show, but maybe I'm sure it's not.
Well, this is my first experience, so I have nothing to compare it to. But everybody here has been lovely.
Yeah, that's really cool.
I think they treated me slightly differently because they knew I was not a concept designer. They found me on Instagram, and they wanted designers who were not animation industry as their main job, just to try and get something that looked a little bit different.
Yeah.
So they've been sympathetic with my crapness.
Wow. Well, I'm almost seeing you like signing off to comics and going to work in animation for years because your backgrounds are incredible. I mean, you will push them so far with like opportunity. I think like there's one image on your Tumblr where it's kind of like a mouse kind of walking through some like lily pads and a bunch of foliage and stuff, and the amount of detail inside the backgrounds was like stunning to me. I mean, it's like you're creating little images and little motifs all throughout the leaves and how things combine and stuff. And it's just like, it's incredible. And whether or not you could do that on a fast-paced show over multiple things,
that's the question, right? I mean, the answer is probably no.
Yeah, but something of your. That's very cool that company is searching for people.
Yeah, good on them.
Yeah.
And thank you to them.
Yeah. I like. Have you seen Over the Garden Wall? Are you a big animation fan, or?
I don't know whether I would designate myself as a big animation, but I watch a fair bit. Over the Garden Wall, that sounds incredibly familiar, but I don't suppose I can have seen it, or I'd know.
Yeah, it was a small kind of miniseries on Cartoon Network here in America, and it's the character kind of with the big tall dunce hat, sort of a red dunce hat. I don't know if you've seen him before, but it was.
I'm going to Google it.
Yeah. Those backgrounds, they seem to achieve a really nice atmosphere that could be helpful for you to look at, or just enjoyable. Where it's all very, very organic. They don't try to do. It doesn't seem like they're trying to do like mini shortcuts. So that was really fun.
Yeah, I guess. Oh wow, this looks right up my street. I guess that's an aesthetic that I value. Shortcuts have a practical necessity, especially with a workload as intensive as comics or animation. But I try and make a distinction, and this is something that I'm trying to get better at as well. I feel like sometimes I put too much in and it gets in the way. But I feel like you should never make a shortcut that is at the expense of the audience experience or the story. If putting a little bit more time or effort or detail or nuance into a particular frame is going to benefit the story, then yeah, it's a small sacrifice to make, I feel like. And it also relates back to what I was saying earlier about joy, because it's not like it's a burden for me to put all these things in.
Yeah.
It's almost like the character of Arthur in Geis, the kind of comic relief character.
Yes.
I feel like oftentimes his writing and his scenes have a different flow to them because they didn't have to be a particular way, they're more intuitive.
Okay.
He has a function in the narrative, but he doesn't have to hit too many bases. Like Nima Sanayo, they have strict beats they have to hit. But he's a little bit more free. And that's backgrounds often feel a lot that way to me, that there's sort of like the focal point of a scene is not usually in the environment. The environment is providing context or atmosphere or helping to support the focus. And that's very liberating. So then it becomes very joyful making those drawings.
That makes sense. That's really cool. I definitely want to try that on my next book, because it's like if you drew a tree and you tried to draw every leaf, it's killing to you, and it's not very helpful to the reader. I mean, it's not very it's just murder trying to it's detracting. And I've been looking at like David Hockney paintings and these really amazing forms of natural life and some sort of translation of that. But well, good luck with the animation. And,
thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll stop the recording here because it's been an hour and a half and
you may have to do some editing.
Yeah, well, I won't if you're okay with it.
Oh no, it's okay. You can let it run if you think anybody will.
I'm too lazy.
But watch your 1.5.
Yeah, the channel's too casual to edit. Yeah,
I actually, as a consumer, I love it when the videos run long.
Yeah,
I never care because the context where I'm watching them is usually beside me while I'm working. So, 1.5 listening to some people talk, and it's in it's a subject that I'm interested in. I'm all for that. That's why I'm excited about this YouTube channel you've recommended.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, it's such an interesting space right now where people, it's like a weird parallel thing where it's like movie industries or shows are like, people can't sit in a theater for this amount, so we're going to condense things and cut a lot of stuff. But it's like, but we could listen to a podcast for 2 hours, or we could watch a YouTube channel. It's all about interest, I think, the quality. People will stay around if the movie is good for 3 hours, but the movie has to be good in all parts. Kind of a crap movie or show, well, yeah, I'm out at 20 minutes. I'm waiting for it to be done, just because it's not good. So it's not really about that. It's like people are organic, and they will be interested if something is interesting, and they will be bored if it is boring.
Yeah, for sure. This is where the kind of thing where publishing houses drive me crazy, because they'll look at the data and, it'll be, I don't want to name names, but let's say Cruella. They'll be like looking at the audience data from Cruella. It's like, oh, a lot of people walked out after an hour and 20 minutes. It's like, so it's too long. It's like, no, that's not why they walked out at the hour 20-minute mark. And you don't then make every other movie in your stable fit that hour and 20 minute because people walked out of Cruella.
Oof, yeah, the machine.
Wild. Yeah. Anyway, it was great to talk to you.
Anything else you want to prep people on, or like when is the date that?
Yeah, so Geis 3 is coming out in July here in the UK. Okay. I think a month later in the States, or August, and they're re-releasing both. So if you haven't read parts 1 and 2. Those are getting re-released, and that will be the month before. It's June here in the UK, and I think July in the States. Yeah, would you like to see a few pages from it? I realized that
absolutely.
I meant to show those.
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, I think screen sharing is it's all good.
Yeah, let me just need to click a couple of buttons here. So yeah, you've seen that.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd just put a few images together, talking about Geis and how it was made. This is the first drawing I ever made for the series. Oh, wow. When it was like, it's just like, I like this drawing. These people in funny hats. 6 years later, you've been drawing it incessantly. Anyway, I thought that'd be fun to see. Just make sure I'm clicking on the screen.
The double lighting there, like you're doing a significant amount without doing much spotting of your blacks. Like it's incredible.
Yeah. So this is, I guess, what we were talking about with, if you've got any sort of fundamental knowledge or you're dealing with principles, then you can kind of wear those somewhat lightly in the execution. I think this was just me. Yeah, it was when I discovered that was a thing, and I was playing with that idea. I love, I feel like lighting is, it really is liberating to think about lighting when you draw, and it's very helpful in creating atmosphere for your story further down the road. So this is what Geis looked like before. This is what I was taking around to publishers, just sketch pages like this. Wow. Cut and tape together. That was how I did my editing. Still do my editing that way now. Okay. And I just wrote it out like this. And then when I was making artwork for Geis, it's like I really liked some of these sketches. We were talking about first lines and leaving stuff unformed and trying to be loose. So I tried as much as possible to match those marks when I was making artwork. Trying to trust, those original, those very earliest drawings. And I would also work at various scales, so not worry too much about the panel size. Okay. I think it's a shame that two of my favorite images from the book are they're just tiny little panels on the top of a page. But yeah, when Io's running off to her house, these two drawings up here, I really, really liked making those.
I've thought about those two. They kind of stand out as far as art pieces.
They're definitely, I think, some of the best pieces of art in the book, for sure. It's just like a kind of throwaway moment. Yeah. It's frustrating, isn't it? You must have experienced this making Joe Death as well. You never know who you're going to be when you get up that morning, and will you have your A game on the important day, or will you be your best self? Sort of something that's contextual or scene building, or not really climactic. What can you do? We do our best.
Yeah.
And then so the color for the books is the palettes are usually designed in the computer, and then they're painted in gouache. Okay. As like flat color pieces that go underneath the artwork.
I see.
So then the costume colors and details and things go on as a digital layer. So it's sort of like line work is ink wash, and then the gouache layer underneath, and then in between is like a digital layer, doing corrections and picking up details. Very labor intensive, but I don't know. It sort of, I like the look of it.
Yeah.
I was trying to copy what they did, what Hergé did, and that era of printmaking where they were doing color separations, and you had kind of the colorist would get the line work, and then they'd make a painting, and it would sit underneath.
I see.
I really like the look of that.
To relate to American readers, Batman Year One, drawn by David Mazzucchelli and colored by Richmond Lewis, I think. It feels very much like that, where it's very painterly, and it doesn't correspond so much to the shapes like Hergé's studio would probably do. There's a lot of
they were sticking very closely to the line, weren't they? But I think that kind of going over edges, using brush marks and so on. Yeah, that's really useful. It's definitely something that I'll try and get better at, try and refine that process. With book 2, there was much closer transition. This is what I'm talking about, starting to get a little bit more slick, a little bit more comfortable. And sometimes that can be a bad thing, and sometimes it can be a good thing. But with Geis 2, I was able to do whole pages on the whole pages of artwork in one take, kind of thing. So you get a page like this, and then put it on the desk and try and match it as closely as possible. Wow. Not tracing, but just try and match the composition. Yeah. And then the color comes in as a third stage. So when I'm making my roughs, I'm always thinking about composition primarily, and as little as possible of everything else. Character expression and composition. So then that's what I try and retain when it comes to making artwork. But for the third one, so it's working slightly differently. The artwork is all in pencil, because I felt like I was losing quite a lot of what I could do in the transition between the pencil roughs and the ink artwork. So these ones I worked directly over the roughs, so the proportions are identical. I'm not guessing that I'm matching the proportions. I'm matching them exactly. And then I did a little bit of architecture building in SketchUp, so that I could do some more complex environments and not have to worry about repeating the perspective again and again. So a rough like this would go underneath, and then the line work goes directly on top of that. And you just kind of you have that skeleton. You sort of you start to breathe the life into it with the line work, and then the color goes on as a third layer. But this time, we switched to all digital color, and it means that. So this was some of my early stage color development where I was still using color with watercolor, so you can still see the brush marks. But time caught up with us, and we couldn't sustain that way of working. So in the end, we're using purely digital color, but I feel like for what we've lost, we've gained quite a bit too. Like the contrasts are more dynamic, and I feel like actually, in a funny way, the color has kind of done that job that I was referring to earlier, where there's no longer such a strong disconnect between text and image, because I feel like the color clarifies the shape language of the images and makes them just a little bit more graphic. And so the bridge is a bit clearer between the two. And yeah, some of these pages, I don't know, I feel like they're really exciting. Like it feels like a good breakthrough for me to be working in this way. And it's just inching closer to that point where everything has a significant role to play, and it's all in service of the story. So yeah, that's a little bit of a try. Hopefully, not too many spoilers in there, but that is a little bit of a trailer for what's coming with Geis 3.
Wow.
And
can I ask you if the new printing is going to be on a little bit of a tighter paper, less porous kind of?
well, the scale is going to be smaller. So if they keep it on that loose matte grain, I think the artwork will suffer.
Yeah.
We'll see. And Nobrow is quite, I'm not that involved in this part of the process. I guess if I was more knowledgeable and more assertive, I could be. But they've done such a good job on Geis 1 and 2, I'm inclined to trust. Like, they know about production. I don't really, I understand in basic terms the differences between gloss and matte paper. But I'm gonna trust their judgment on this. I suspect the paper texture is not going to be as loose as it was on the first two.
Yeah. And it does say that's a very cool, I love all those images, and I think, that this makes more sense if you're reducing noise from the color of the brush. You're getting just a little bit clearer. And the line and ink work is it's organic enough. It's like that largely organic layer, and that interfacing of like a more flat colors like underneath, like this look. I
think that was my feeling. Like, I don't need to keep, because I love organic mark making and the kind of maker's hand. I tend to make every decision prioritize that kind of language, but actually that almost works to the detriment of, if everything is loose and organic, it can become a bit formless. So nice to have a little bit of a balance, another voice in there.
Things, that's really cool. Well, thanks for
sharing. Anyway, that was very nice to share them with you.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I hope a lot of people see those, and I certainly some makers will. I know a few people that are making comics and they're watching. So that was really valuable. Seeing those like SketchUp programs, like, to me. Is it very hard to do SketchUp? Like, is it
super easy? I'm terrible at these things. It's super easy. Right. I think the hard thing is making it not look like it was done in SketchUp. That beginning location, some of the later scenes that take place in there, they look a little bit too much like it's a model. But there's some other locations where the blend is a bit better.
Yeah, that's such an extraordinary thing to come away with some perspective that an audience can feel like they're in a room or in a space. Like, perspective, I think, is the tool that I have like refused to kind of put in my tool belt for a long time.
I think it just came down to the fact that I like my like you were talking about atmospheric perspective earlier. I've always wanted audience to feel like they're in a space. Like that's why I don't break the panel very often. Because I feel like the panel is a window that you look through, and the space within is like a coherent, tactile, real space. Okay. And so I felt like SketchUp kind of fit that. It's like it's not cheating. It's like it's helping me to communicate to my audience that this is a real environment, and my characters move through that 3-dimensional space.
That's very cool. Yeah, that makes so much sense.
I also built the buildings, so I didn't do a great job of it. I'm not going to be a great architect, but it's still my work.
Yeah, you built your home, you said? You built it?
No, I didn't build this building. No. The building's in the comic. God, no. Thank God I didn't build my home. We would be in dust and ashes right now.
It's like, wow. So you just unlocked this huge...
Just a Renaissance man. No, I'm the opposite. I know a lot about very little. I'm completely hopeless at everything else.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Anyway.
Cool. Well,
it was good to talk to you. I really, really enjoyed myself. I hope it's been fun for you too.
Yeah. Let me stop the recording here. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed that. And if that was your first exposure to Alexis, I hope it was a good one. He is a very good illustrator and artist, really doing things that I just haven't seen before, or that have kind of been lost. I think a lot of our conversation revolved around bringing things that we love from the past forward into the future, and combining that kind of timeline and being a continuation of age-old stories, I think. and really, I enjoyed a lot of the points. I mean, I'm always trying to sum up sort of what I'm after as far as what I'm doing, not just drawing or writing, but the whole thing in my life, and which is, as you can imagine, can be probably hard. But there's something to be said, I think, about the individual as a creative being, and many people have said more important things, but I seem to be highlighting a lot of differences between the individual, that's you, that's me, and the potential fertility of our work, of our projects, and the kind of bankruptcy of creative entertainment companies that certainly involve a lot of people, creative people, wonderfully creative and artistic people on so many different levels. But the whole thing is a corporate entity, and it is a corporate storytelling machine to pump out content that they feel the widest audience will like. And this is really, I think, a new, it's highly unsettling in my opinion, because these franchises came from places of individual interest. For instance, Lord of the Rings came from Tolkien's interest of language and myth, and that combined into a modern, at his time, a modern story that was bringing those old things forward. And the same with George Lucas and Star Wars, and Rowling and Harry Potter, and Lewis and Narnia. These are the big kind of franchise things that became popular after being coming from out of the blue, essentially, coming from individuals who had a certain interest in a couple things, and they combined it and they made something very personal, and these things became very popular. And I think there's a maximum amount of they're kind of white hot stories on their first introduction into the world. Now we're living in an era in which the largest companies buy these properties and they fashion them into their own image, whatever they want. And usually it's with the desire to gain the most amount of money for that large purchase. It's just, it's a machine. It's not, I know there are great people at these companies, but the machine requires a return on investment. So if you pay for Star Wars for $1 billion or more, you have to gain at least $1 billion back. So, just economically, there are reasons to suspect and the difference. I'm highlighting a difference, and I think you'll see it. And every time I do it, I think, oh man, I could have done that better. Or, but really, it's a call to anyone who's frustrated with big box kind of entertainment to create your own stuff. I mean, it's not to attack these things, because I think a lot of people do like them, and I think there can be worthwhile products that come from those companies. But there's an active element to fandom that I think is very worthwhile to engage in. It can really elevate your life quality just by engaging with ideas, pencil, paper, and a word processor called a computer, and doing, bringing old truths that we feel are valuable into the next generation. So, I really want to call that out and really ask you all to do that. If you are a fan that's frustrated with big box kind of stuff and stories, please take the time and invest in your own stories, and build a community around you to walk that road with someone else who feels the same, but is different, and their stories will be different than yours. It's a really engaging part of my life, and I think it's a wonderful thing to be a part of. So do that, and purchase our books. But you all know that, so I won't say it again. But thank you for watching and for enduring this long conversation. I think probably by now everyone who's here likes long conversations. So, all right, stay tuned for the next one. Thank you.